carry on.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's week 2 of our series. For most, it's morning. For those other ones, it's late evening, but it's great to have a wide range of people. You've seen the list there of the 5 weeks that we've got assembled here. I'd like to acknowledge the work that OGG, the Overberg Group, and Geological Society of South Africa put in to get all this organised, but particularly to Henny, John and Nolene, who make the whole lot work, but also do the work in between talks to help myself, help Caitlin and the speakers coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. A little bit about Caitlin Jones. Caitlin is a graduate of Stellenbosch University, been a bit of a star student there, I'm told, and has just finished an MSc that she's going to be talking about, based in Barberton, supervised by Alex Kisters, and Alex will be our speaker next week. I'd like to point out 1 or 2 things that about her work and her period at university there, and that is the support she's had from Pan-African Resources, obviously from the Barberton mines and Sheba, and of recent, post-MSc, she's joined Tech Consulting Group, and I'd like to thank them all for the way they have supported, in this case, Caitlin, but other young geologists, and it's just so important for the future of the profession and industry. And to Tech, it wasn't necessary to give her time off work today. I hope she works overtime and extra to catch up, but it wasn't necessary, but thank you, it's much appreciated, Ian and co. At that stage, I'm going to hand over now. What the slide on there at the moment is really just for the to be picked up on the YouTube. It's all over to Caitlin now. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. As mentioned, I'm Caitlin, and I'll be discussing the topic of hydrothermal fluid flow, alteration, and gold mineralization within the Sheba and Fairview mines of the Barberton Greenstone Belt. So just to recap from last week's talk by Neil and some background for this talk to set the scene, a hydrothermal ore deposit requires the channelized flow of vast volumes of fluid. And then on a regional scale, this fluid then needs to be focused and precipitated into preferential sink sites. And these locations are characterized as being sites of low mean stress. So when this fluid travels along these channels and pathways, it results also in the alteration of the raw rock surrounding it. So over to Barberton. The Paleoarchean Barberton Greenstone Belt is located in the eastern portion of the Kaapvaal Craton in the Mpumalanga province here in South Africa. The northeast trending belt is comprised of the Barberton supergroup that is subdivided into 3 groups, namely the basal onverwacht group, pictured here in purple, which is mainly comprised of mafic and ultramafic lava flows. Overlying this is the metaturbidite fig tree group, depicted in green. And then lastly is the arenaceous Moody's group, depicted in yellow. So the polyphase deformation forming the belt is mainly subdivided into 4 events. D1, the first event, is only observed here in the southern regions of the belt and records a compressional phase in the onverwacht group rocks. This is then followed by D2, the second regionally recognized, for the second deformational event, sorry, but first regionally recognized event that occurred between 3230 and 3225 MA. And this involves northwest-southeast subhorizontal shortening and thrusting. Subsequently, D3, the third deformational event, is roughly coaxial to that of D2 and also results in the northeast trend of the belt that is seen today. So late D3 is related to thrusting and refolding of folds and faults such as the Barbrook and Sheba fault, along with the Eureka and the Ulindi synclines, about a northwest trending axis. And this also, however, only occurs here in the northwestern portion of the belt, whereas the remainder of the belt still has a northeast trend. So this refolding has been explained by two opposing models. The first described the refolding by the diaperic rise of the two bounding plutons against these synclines, whereas an alternative model suggested the refolding in response to continuous or progressive northwest-southeast shortening, and then thereby the greenstone strata bent around the competent plutons, which basically acted as rigid buttresses. So the last deformational event, D4, records an extensional regime in the belt and also is characterized by late normal faulting that cross-cuts the gold mineralization. So gold mineralization and mining in the belt is concentrated within the Sheba Fairview complex located in the northwestern portion of the belt. And here in the arcuated Sheba Hills region, the Sheba and Fairview mines have produced over 10 million ounces of gold during their 130 years of mining. So past and present mining has focused on a large number of discrete quartz carbonate sulfide ore bodies, which will be referred to in this talk as the fractures and the reefs. So the timing of the gold mineralization is, however, very controversial, with ages ranging between 3126 and 3015 MA. And this timing postdates the main accretionary phase of the belt by between 200 and 120 million years. So the mineralized reefs within the Sheba and the Fairview mines are developed throughout the supercrustal sequence, and gold is hosted in a variety of wall rocks, including the quartzites of the Moody's group, the interbedded Greywackian shells of the Fig Tree group, along with the serpentinite and ultramorphic schist of the Waterfreden formation that forms part of the Onverwacht group rocks. So the bulk of the mineralization is concentrated in the hinge region of these refolded synclines and are hosted by well-bedded metasedimentary rocks of the Moody's and the Fig Tree group. And these rocks are preserved within two regional scale but complexly refolded Eureka and Ulindi synclines that are separated by the central Sheba fault. So both these synclines are overturned and northwest verging and has steep southeasterly plunges. So the northern limb of the Ulindi syncline has isoclinal high amplitude folds of the which is known as the Sheba anticlinorium. And these folds consist of rocks of the Waterfreden formation and are surrounded by interbedded Greywackian shell units of the Fig Tree group. So the ore bodies within the Sheba Fairview complex have different geometries, highly variable orientations. They are also hosted in diverse rock types and lastly also have different structural controls. And these varying aspects have resulted in diverging views about firstly the origin and secondly the timing of the gold mineralization. And there also isn't an understanding as to why the bulk of the mineralization is here within the Sheba Fairview complex, where the gold mining is very sparse in the rest of the belt. So within the Sheba Fairview complex, there are three main controls of mineralization that can be distinguished. So the first main control is the mineralization along the central Sheba fault. And the Sheba fault has steep dips to the south, the southeast and east, and has widths ranging between being a few meters wide up to 75 meters wide. And this fault juxtaposes the Eureka and Ulindi synclines, where the Eureka syncline to the north is mainly comprised of quartzites and sandstones of the Moody's group, whereas the Ulindi syncline to the south is comprised of interbedded Greywackian shell units of the Fig Tree group, but then also have these Waterfreden formation anticlines. So the fault cuts up the Moody's group units and from the north to the south, and this underlines the early thrust fault kinematics of the fault. But since then, the fault has undergone many reactivations, especially strike slip movement, during this refolding of the two synclines. So the ore bodies are developed in the immediate footwall and damage zone of the fault. and are hosted in competent Moody's quartzites or conglomerate units. So common ore bodies of this type of mineralization include the quartz carbonate stockworks along the Sheba fault that are generally associated with free gold, such as, for example, the famous Golden Quarry ore body or Royal Sheba. And these ore bodies occur in gentle fault undulations corresponding to dilational geometries. So along with the gold mineralization, there's also the presence of pervasive silicification and carbonate alteration within these Moody's wall rocks along the fault. And this testifies to the extensive fluid channeling by the fault itself. So most of the currently and larger ore bodies are located in the hanging wall of the Sheba fault in the northern normal limb of the Ulindi syncline. And this second control is linked to mineralization confined to lithological contacts between these metasedimentary rocks of the Fig Tree group and the altered mafic to ultramafic rocks of the tightly infolded Walterfreden Formation anticlines. And these contacts represent prominent rheological contrasts. So what this essentially means is that you have rocks with different competencies juxtaposed against each other, forming these rheological contrasts. So at Fairview Mine, there are two economically important ore bodies, namely the Main Reef Complex, which is referred to as the MRC, and the Main Reef Thrust, which is known as the MRT. So the central MRC has a down plunge extent of up to 2 kilometers, while the smaller MRT ore body to the west has been explored roughly to a depth of 1 kilometer. So the MRC is located along the contact of the ultramafic Barberton #2 anticline and the interbedded metagrayraki with minor shale of the Fig Tree group. And this contact corresponds to a low displacement brittle ductile shear zone. And the mineralization is mainly confined to undulations and dilational geometries along these sheared and lithological and rheological contacts. So both these ore bodies plunge to the southeast and is therefore parallel to the hinge of the refolded Ulindi and Eureka synclines. And this gives evidence for hinge parallel permeability and fluid flow. So at Sheba Mine, on the other hand, the main ore chute is referred to as the Swartkoppie chute and also has an overall southeast plunge. So the main difference is that the Swartkoppie chute is not confined to one of these ultramafic anticlines, but instead climbs through several of the stacked anticlines where it originates along the Swartkoppie anticline that is developed throughout the Sheba Fairview complex, through the Barberton #1, and eventually through the Barberton #2 as well. And the mineralization also differs here to that at Fairview, where here the mineralization is mainly confined to the green fuchsite quartz schist. And this green fuchsite quartz schist is basically an alteration product of the ultramafic Walterfreden Formation units. So along the chute, the economic grade mineralization is either bedding parallel at the contact between the ultramafic schists and the overlying Fig Tree group rocks, and here is referred to as the main fracture, or the mineralization is confined to bedding discordant brittle ductile shears, such as, for example, the flat structure or the cross fractures, and these transgress the green fuchsite quartz schist unit. So the last type are the volumetrically small but high grade bedding discordant steep reverse or low angle faults that are located within both the Moody's and the Fig Tree group rocks. And these ore bodies are also further removed from the central Sheba fault and are also preferentially developed within two competent quartzitic units in the Moody's group, or within the more competent Grayraki unit of the Fig Tree group. So recently, some of the historically mined ore bodies have been reopened, and mining targets high-grade quartz carbonate reefs, and the gold grades are as high as 100 grams a ton, and the gold is also mainly mined as free gold with minor pyrite. So the main difference between these ore bodies and the previously mentioned fault-controlled or bedding subparallel reefs is that these are all bedding discordant, and they cut across bedding at high and low angles and are also confined to specific competent lithological units. So just to summarize the mineralization again, the reefs within the Sheba Fairview complex have different orientations. They are hosted in various rock types. They have varying geometries, and then lastly are either bedding parallel or cross-cut bedding. But regardless of all these varying factors, they all required large amounts of channelized fluid flow for the gold mineralization to occur. So now we're going to look more closely at an example of a bedding discordant reef within the Moody's group. And this is the Thomas fracture. That is a presently mined ore body that is situated on the overturned southern limb of the Eureka syncline. So historically, the grades were as high as 500 grams a ton. However, unfortunately, currently, we're looking at gold grades averaging around 30 grams a ton. So this top image here is a level plan of the Thomas fracture, and the gold mineralization is hosted by a quartz vein system that strikes northwest-southeast with a strike length of roughly 60 meters and has also dips at about 75 degrees to the northeast. So the central vein also sharply cross-cuts the east-northeast overturned bedding. And the ore body also has an overall southeast plunge and is therefore also subparallel to the refolded hinge of the two synclines. So these two images are underground workings of Thomas and looking up at the roof of the stope itself. So Thomas is developed as a massive to anastomosing gray to black quartz vein, which is outlined here as the white stippled lines. And this has then subsequently been overprinted by a vein parallel thin cataclysite band, which is depicted here as the orange stippled lines. And along with these cataclysites, the brittle appearance of the central vein also relates to the presence of narrow, low angle shears and fractures that crosscut the central vein and the wall rocks, and also displace bedding parallel veins with a down dip dextral sense of shear. So always something nice to look at. Gold is mainly mined here as free gold, and grades along the vein system are very erratic. So just to summarize again, overall, the kinematics and characteristics of the central vein show that Thomas is a steeply dipping, dextrally oblique reverse shear. So the Thomas fracture is hosted within the competent MDQ2 quartzite unit of the Geological formation, where macroscopically the beds are light gray in color, and cross bedding is also really common to see. The rocks comprise mainly of sub-rounded monocrystalline quartz, which make up roughly 75% of the rock, along with lesser amounts of plagioclase, microcline, and lithic clast. And these are all set in a fine-grained sericite quartz matrix. So a very important thing to note is that these rocks lack major alteration features, and this thereby suggests that they have not experienced significant alteration or fluid flow. So while the gold mineralization and large quartz veins testify to the focusing of large amounts of fluids along the Thomas fracture itself, the raw rocks that we've just looked at on the previous slide that are outside of the vein system are actually fairly unaltered. However, the bedding planes of the quartzite around the Thomas fracture contain both minor amounts of quartz veins, but also extensive hydrothermal alteration assemblages, such as you've got chlorite, muscovite, and carbonates. And these two features suggest a more confined and bedding parallel regional fluid flow within the wall rocks. So on a larger regional scale, a more obvious indicator of this bedding parallel fluid flow includes firstly bedding parallel quartz and quartz carbonate veins. And these are present throughout the Sheba and Fairview mine workings. And along with these veins, there's also abundant sulfide mineralization, which is mainly pyrite. And this is observed as bedding and foliation parallel stringers. So now that we know that there is evidence of bedding parallel fluid flow on a local and a mine scale, we now need to figure out what controls the regional fluid flow within the broader Sheba Fairview complex. So firstly, 85% of the presently and historically mined reefs within the Sheba Fairview complex occur within this refolded hinge of the Eureka and Ulundi synclines. And along with this, the southeast plunge of the large ore bodies such as the MRC, MRT, and the Swartkoppie Shoot, but also the smaller reefs such as the Thomas fracture, are all parallel to the refolded hinge of these two synclines. Also, the ore bodies throughout the Sheba Fairview complex are also unaffected by the refolding event. And this therefore shows that the fluid flow and mineralization occurred during the refolding of the two synclines. So this regional fluid migration in faults has been well documented, and fluid flow follows changes in hydraulic gradients from areas of high mean rock stress, which typically include the fold limbs, towards areas with a reduced mean rock stress, which in this case is the fold hinge. So this regional fluid distribution during folding may therefore explain the concentration of the reefs in the refolded hinge zone, whereas there are only a few gold workings outside of the Sheba Fairview complex itself. So a really important aspect is the well-preserved bedding and mechanical layering of the fig tree and the Moody's group, as this promotes flexural slip during folding. So this flexural slip is particularly pronounced in the interbedded shale and greywacke sequence in the fig tree group, in which the weaker shale layers localized strain and thereby acted as low displacement slip surfaces. And this flexural slip and fluid flow along these bedding planes are very prominent within the Eureka and Ulundi synclines during this late stage refolding along the northwestern margin of the greenstone belt. And this is also unlike the other syncline structures within the interior of the belt, because they haven't undergone this refolding event. So now that we know that on a regional and a local scale that the bedding planes of the metasedimentary units acted as fluid conduits during flexural slip, we now need to figure out how these auriferous ore bodies are able to tap and channel into the large fluid volume. So firstly, we're going to be looking at the bedding discordant structures, and these include the low angle bedding discordant thrust, such as, for example, the Hope Reef at Fairview Mine, which is hosted in altered greywacke sequence of the fig tree group. But along with the Hope Reef at Sheba Mine, there's also the low angle flat structure that is hosted within the competent green fuchsite quartz schist of the Barberton formation. And both these ore bodies have kinematics of top to the northwest, which corresponds to northwest southeast directed shortening. So along with these low angle thrusts, there's also steep reverse faults, such as the Thomas fracture that we previously mentioned. And the Thomas fracture is hosted within quartzites and is also sharply bedding discordant. So all of these structures are therefore ideally orientated for the collection and channeling of bedding plane fluid, as they cut across countless bedding planes and can consequently tap this bedding plane fluid flow into the fractures themselves. So the orientation and kinematics of the structures, but also the occurrence of the reefs confined to competent lithological units, such as, for example, the Gray-Wacky sequence of the Fig Tree Group, the green Fuchsite quartz schist of the Walter-Friedland Formation, and then in Thomas's case, the quartzite units, suggests both a structural and lithological control on these fractures formation. So now looking at the ore bodies along the lithological contacts, the ore shoots, including the main reef complex, the MRT and the Swartkopje shoot, are all located at the contact between the Walter-Friedland Formation anticlines and the well-bedded metasedimentary rocks of the Fig Tree Group. And the sighting of these large ore bodies along these lithological contacts emphasize the role of rheological contrast and lithological boundaries for fluid flow. And this juxtaposition of units with strongly contrasting rigidity promotes brittle fracturing and therefore also fluid flow towards the more competent lithology. So the regional F3 folds in the interior of the greenstone belt are commonly tight synclines that are juxtaposed against steep reverse faults. And these all have overturned southeastern limbs and normal northwestern limbs. And this gives rise to the northwest vergence of the folds. So the Eureka and Ulindi synclines that are separated by the central Sheba fault form part of this northwest verging fold and thrust bar-like geometry. The main difference, however, is that these two synclines along the margin of the belt to those in the interior have undergone a refolding event and are now banded or arcuated, whereas the other synclines all still have their original northeast trends. So there are a few key features that can help us to try to figure out how this refolding event took place. So the first main clue to look at is that the deformation and the mineralization of the auriferous reefs in the Sheba and Fairview mines all record a northwest-southeast directed shortening. Secondly, these ore bodies are also unaffected by the refolding and thereby had to be late during the deformational history. So these features suggest that the bending of the folds occurred during progressive or renewed northwest-southeast shortening. And during this shortening, the Eureka and Ulindi synclines were juxtaposed against irregular basement plutons, namely the Carp Valley tonalite to the northwest, and to the northeast, the Nelsprate or Stentor pluton. And this folding also resembles the formation of, for example, salients or oroclines of fold and thrust belts that are seen in other parts of the world. So in conclusion, we present here a comprehensive and holistic model for the regional fluid flow patterns within the Sheba Fairview complex and how these fluids get tapped and channeled into the localized ore bodies. So the mineralization within the Sheba Fairview complex may be explained by the temporal and spatial coincidence of the well-bedded metasedimentary sequence, which is the Fig Tree and the Moody's group within the Eureka and Ulindi synclines, that underwent firstly folding and subsequent refolding during late stage northwest-southeast shortening. And these refolding processes are then associated with frictional slip along the bedding planes, and they have then accommodated bedding parallel, regionally pervasive fluid infiltration. And that then was subsequently focused into either cross-cutting brittle structures during the fold tightening, or then, for example, into the jog geometries. So while we try to constrain the relative late timing of the gold mineralization, to be during the refolding of the Ulindi and Eureka synclines within the Sheba Fairview complex. There are still uncertainties regarding, firstly, the exact timing of the gold mineralization, and then secondly, also the tectonic regimes, in which it forms. But Alex is going to touch on this next week, and we'll shed some light on this. And then lastly, we also still have uncertainties regarding the fluid sources responsible for the mineralization. So here are just two papers that formed the main chapters of my MSc thesis, and also used for this talk as a reference. And then these are also very important references that were used throughout this talk as well. So thanks again, everybody, for attending and listening to the talk.
Thank you very, very much, Caitlin. The floor is now open for questions. You can either type it in, like there's already one. Clay wants to know, can you differentiate? Sorry, it's gone off my screen. You can read that,
Okay, sorry, just let me quickly open it up.
Yeah.
Can you differentiate different mineralization fluid events? So the problem with trying to figure out what fluid event it is that these things have seen so many different fluid phases. So that's also why it's really difficult to try and use, for example, isotopes to try and constrain what your fluid source is, for example, because you have all these different phases of fluid flow, so you can't basically try to constrain your fluid flow by, for example, isotopes. So that is a very unfortunate, tricky thing within these, especially Archean belts, because we have seen multiple phases of fluid flow. So sorry, Clay, Andy, Clay, we unfortunately can't do that. I just want to check the other questions here, sorry. What is the age of the Northwest Southeast compressional event? Hi, Susan. So we understand that D3 has to be late in the deformational history. The problem is that D4, which shows a extensional regime in the belt, that cross-cuts the gold mineralization. So the ages of D3 and D4, unfortunately, are really ambiguous, but it's definitely post 32225, which is the main suturing event of the belt. But yeah, we're looking at D3 being really quite late as almost 3040, 3027, because that's our ages of gold mineralization. So we're looking at D3 actually being much later than what was previously constrained. I hope that answers your question.
Eddie, can you unmute us all and Caitlin download, and then we can see each other on the screen and carry on with the discussion?
You just need to unmute yourself. Caitlin, there's a very good question from Julian there that you can ask at the moment.
Sorry, let me just scroll down. Why an MSc and not a PhD? I actually spoke to Henny and John about this. Myself and Alex did have a conversation at a point of, possibly upgrading, but, PhD really puts one into a very specific niche. And I really wanted, first to get some real experience and really find out what I want to do. If I want to be a gold girl for the rest of my life or not. So yeah, that's mainly why I stopped with MSc. But definitely PhDs on the cards. Don't really know exactly when, but yeah, it's definitely going to happen at a point.
Nils, why don't you just pose your question while you're there? Switch on your voice.
Thanks, Annie. Hi, Caitlin. Excellent talk. Great to see the work you've done in Barberton. I've got a whole list of questions and comments, maybe worth a drink another time, but so first off, did you look at gold mineralization events across other sort of Archean terrains when you were looking at the Barberton? Because there are lots of similarities that you can see, and you're talking about this 3 to 3.2 billion year old age period. We see a lot of discussions about how gold mineralization came about and all of that. So to turn all of that preamble into a question is, you've associated the gold mineralization with the refolding syncline, right? But if you look at the sort of fluid flow structures, and you've identified them very clearly, you've got large quartz veins with free gold. You've identified a damaged zone. In this case, it's largely in a footwall, and where you see disseminated alteration, you see sort of larger or offshoot structures into the hanging wall. Right, and you must think about fluids. Are they quite opportunistic, and their expansion environments, and they need to open. So there's fluid pressure that guides these materials. And so, do you think there might be sort of an opportunity where this fluid flow is actually not related to the compression or deformation of this thing, but you've got a pre-existing structure where a lot of fluid flow can come in and then react? Either the big ones you were talking about, pressure drop mineralization, but this disseminated one is quite interesting because you're getting sort of mineral grain scale percolation or permeability of the rocks and alteration. And that's okay. Coming to my question, then the question that I posed was, have you seen sort of mineralogical controls on a chemical level that could be linked to this disseminated alteration, i.e. where there are pockets of gold, rather than it just being a lithological or a structural control?
Yeah, so for example, with the quartzites, so let's just talk about Thomas first. Sorry, this is now a big part question. I will touch on each. So for example, the quartzites around Thomas, super inert, right? You're not going to have any chemical reaction with that. You don't have iron-rich, elements in that. So there you're looking purely lithological in the sense of a structural control. You need a really competent unit. So then along with this, let's now go to, for example, the main reef complex, which is along these lithological contacts. So there you need this interbedded of highly competent, highly incompetent, highly competent, highly incompetent, right? Ductile, brittle, ductile, brittle. So with that, your ductile units then localize the strain. So they are highly sheared, localized the strain, whereas your then competent units, again, they cannot deform in this manner. They have to then brittly fracture, if that makes sense. So on another sense, you do have a chemical trap in some sites. For example, also at the MRC, I didn't touch on this. It's obviously too many things to touch in half an hour, but there you have also graphite-rich shales. And as we all know, graphite obviously now a reducing front. So for example, in those units, you also have disseminated mineralization, and not just mineralization confined to a structure, for example. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I really do hope so. Are we on the right track so far?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think these are some interesting questions to think about, especially then, you mentioned Alex is going to talk next week more about the tectonic setting, and I'll be keen to dial into that.
Yes.
So, because we were looking at this in Canada in sort of some disseminated gold deposits to try and understand, what are these controls? And we were looking at diaprism versus plate tectonics and subductions effectively.
Yes.
And we were saying, can we use the structural controls and fluid flow dynamics to answer those kind of questions? And so if you can constrain the gold source based on your structural understanding of what the fluid flow conduits are and how they interact and the timing, I think this 3 billion year mark becomes very, very interesting across the gold regions globally. And I'm sure people on this call will agree with that. But you've touched on that. It's good.
Okay, sorry, thanks.
Julian's question runs on from there, where he says, may I ask about the fluid flow onto the sun form? Are the complementary antiforms thrust out, or are they a target? And then you can take over from there, Neil.
Okay, thanks, Annie.
Sorry, so I'm going to answer Julian's question first. So we have two juxtaposed synclines. We're obviously assuming at one point there was an antiform. It's obviously been thrusted away now. The antiform targets, let's say southern parts of the belt, they unfortunately, what we're really looking for is this refolding event. So we have flexural slip during the first, forming of the synclines, but then this refolding, especially late during the sequence, that's when your initial thrusts get reactivated, and then fluids sort of use this already existing structure. But I really think the most important thing is this refolding event. So southern parts of the belt, no, we don't find a lot, in anticlines. Obviously, if these Eureka and Ulindi synclines were two antiforms, we all know then your gold mineralization have been, X amount of times more than it is now, because it is going to escape, unfortunately, out of the synclines. You don't have that nice cap. For example, what you guys have there in Bendigo, you guys all have antiforms that form these nice saddle reefs. Where here, we have got two big synclines, unfortunately. But yeah, if we could have changed it, to be two anticlines, it would have been much better. Julian, I hope that answers your question.
What I was getting at, Caitlin, was that you had a map, and unfortunately the map's just a 2D diagram, but you had fluid flow going towards the middle of the synform. Now that's not impossible, but generally fluids will react to the natural buoyancy, so they want to go up rather than down, particularly once fluid pressure is buffered towards being close to the lithostat. So my thoughts were more that you're looking at a part of a system, and if you found the complementary antiform that is refolding, so not the first phase fold, but the second phase syncline, and if you had the complementary antiform, surely that is just a brilliant target if it exists.
So sorry, on the 2D map, yes, we have two first order synclines that have then been refolded. So this refolded hinge, it's still a syncline, but in a sense, how can I say, on a plan view map, that was a picture essentially. The fluid flow is still going to go towards that hinge. Unfortunately, like we're saying, it is synclines, yes. So you do have this buoyancy driven. In the paper, we do touch on this. We do have this buoyancy escape of the fluids, and that's what we sort of explained as these higher lying structures, how they then could get this fluid flow. But yeah, there is unfortunately not a corresponding anticline. We don't have that here in Barberton, but I get what you're saying. That would have been absolutely amazing.
Okay, I've got quite a lot more questions here lined up, so I might go through them fairly quickly. But let me say, first of all, from myself, congratulations on a great talk. The science, it's all there, but it was also presented really well. And there's a whole number of comments in the chat saying exactly the same thing. So well done from that point of view.
Thank you.
One question here, is there evidence that the Sheba fault is a fault and not a shear zone? You might quickly like to comment on that.
So it has to be a fault, right? It literally juxtaposes two synclines. In nature, you're not going to have two synclines next to each other. But now it has obviously been reactivated, like I said, and it's essentially a shear zone. It's not one straight line. Its widths range between being 0 to like 75 meters wide. So definitely anastomosis has undulations. For example, that's where your golden quarry ore body is in this fault undulation. So I hope that's answering the first part of the question.
We'll take that as, okay, it's a terminology thing as well. Do you have any SC fabrics?
Is this still fault related, do you believe? Or because you mean, this is not quite broad.
Sorry, I'll read the full. Do you have any SC fabrics or evidence of shearing where you mentioned flexural slip?
Yes, we have, sorry, I can show you more photos. Who is this? I don't know who this person is, but if you want to email me, we can obviously share more photos with you, or, the papers go into more detail. We have, SC fabrics shearing along the bedding planes. For example, you have those bedding parallel stringers, even of your pyrites as well, all just sheared. So 100% we have evidence of shearing.
Okay. It's more a suggestion from Andy Clay. You might look at estimates of origin, porosity, and permeability of the host lithologies to see if that differentiates host preferences. Nice talk.
Okay, yes, I hear you.
Andy, did you want to add anything to that? Or is that the question you meant, or the suggestion you meant?
No, that's it. But I think you know, looking at the original permeability, porosity sort of parameters of the host rocks might also help.
Yeah, so the only thing, for example, with like a quartzite, you know, these metasedimentary units have a sericite quartz matrix. So the inherent porosity there, you know, we're looking at very, very minuscule amounts. That's why you really need these fracture formation for the permeability to occur for the gold mineralization. But I do get what you're saying. Thank you.
Another one generally is for those who want, the paper is available. Henny's put in that link and they can download that. Could you just tell us the Thomas structure work? Is that in the first paper or the second paper?
That's in this paper by myself and Alex Jones and Kisters, whereas the other paper is now more looking at the alteration sequence, which Neil touched on last week, with the flat structure hosted in the green fuchsite quartz schist and how this schist came about. So that paper touches more on that, whereas the second paper now gives a holistic view of Barberton itself.
Okay, that makes it clear. Both are in all geology reviews for those who want to follow up further. I think the bit that I really liked about your Thomas structure thing this morning was for those skeptics who don't believe that fluids travel through solid rock, just beautiful examples of how it does, and basically the whole theme of this 5 weeks was nice for those who don't believe in those things. Have we got any more questions?
Yeah, Neil,
Neil,
can I just ask one? Yeah, and I come in as an explorationist rather than a gold geologist. And Caitlin, you know, we did ask this in the practice run. I mean, all this great work has been done, and Pan African's been one of the sponsors, I presume. And really, are you now able to take this information, and that's your game, Neil, and start putting it together and saying, well, you know, it's going to take us to the next bunch of Barberton gold deposits that we haven't yet found. And you know, there's obviously sort of a whole process and theme behind this. So that's my very, you know, basic question, as I say, as an explorationist. For you,
Yeah.
or Caitlin. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll try first, and then Neil, obviously, please add on wherever you want to. So, like I'm saying, in Sheba and Fairview's case, you know, they have to stay in that refolded hinge. It doesn't help, like we're seeing, as you move out to the limbs, the gold mineralization dies out. Moving into the interior of the belt, you know, you don't have mineralization. So please, you know, stay in that refolded hinge. But then now on a broader scale for other people, you guys in Australia, for example, you know, you're really looking for sites of low mean stress. And then if you do have a nice integrated sequence of rocks with differing geological contrasts and different competencies, that's obviously a really nice place to look for strain localization. So yeah, that's what I would say. Neil, if you want to add anything to that.
Oh, I was just going to tell John that it's confidential.
That's what I was worried about. I was hoping to go into mistaking.
2 or 3 people have made the observation of the importance of the underground work, and perhaps I could just sort of take that theme a little bit further on, and it's really addressed to everyone. It's not a question as much as how important it is to get access to these underground areas rather than just pontificating from a distance and saying what it might be. And I think you and Alex, Lucas and others have really added a lot to our understanding by getting dirty, getting underground, taking real readings and recordings. So that's a great part of the story. But there's a large number of people I see on this talk this morning who have taken me underground, or I've been underground with, and even though it's a long while ago, sort of don't forget that these things last us for a lifetime. They are really valuable opportunities, and we're grateful to the Gordons and the Garys and the Stephens and a whole lot of others that I can see. So a most valuable part of training for all geologists. So to every mine geologist, thank you. I'm going to wind it up if there's no further questions. Julian, you've got one more by the look of it. Do you want to, take us through that if you would?
I mean, obviously, I'm not familiar with the latest resource reserve statement of your sponsor company, but Barberton had a long history of only having a couple of years production ahead of it, and it always keeps sort of surviving. But
I think we lost Julian there.
There could be massive investment on the part of government and companies. And I just wonder what is the necessary exploration that would put on the books, 5 million ounces, that sort of thing. And if that's being considered, because the starting point is always going to be a good structural study.
Sorry, Julian, I missed a part of your question there. You like, I don't know, you shut
You
off
broke
for
up a
minutes.
bit, you just the first part of it, Julian.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, I think probably the internet's struggling to get over Mount Cook at the moment. So Barberton's always had a difficult life in that it's never had a substantial future ahead of it, although it always stays alive somehow.
Yes.
The basis of exploration is in a situation like that is always going to be a good structural study. So my follow on is, what is the exploration that is now required to find, another 4 or 5 million ounces that would enable substantial investment on the part of companies and government to give something a guaranteed life.
Okay, so one thing that helped us so much, and we initially didn't have this, Alex went and looked at Sheba and Fairview's 3D model. And to understand, we now went on a zoomed in scale to like each local ore body, but to then look out and understand, the bigger picture of what is controlling, the Barberton area as a whole, that helped so much. So I would definitely say if a mine can, a local and a regional scale really try and understand what's happening, then you can maybe go and look for further. So for example, that one image I had was of from the leapfrog model. You can then see, let's say the down plunge extent is going 2 kilometers. Please continue further. This other one was only 1 kilometer's depth. You can continue that. So I think in Barberton's case, you're gonna just have to stick into that hinge and understand the 3D model and then use that to go further, if that makes sense. So I think you got to look, I'm just like repeating myself now, but look, on a mine scale, what's happening, and then on individual ore bodies, so Thomas is a cross-cutting one. Go look for more of those. For example, the flat structure they found accidentally, it was obviously a flat lying structure. So you drill obviously vertically and they hit this, and that was just by chance they found that. So yeah, continually drilling and then, really trying to understand your mine as a whole, if that makes sense.
Okay, I've got one final
rephrase.
Oh, sorry, Julian, you go ahead.
I could rephrase it. Is how do you persuade the people that count, because they've got money in their pockets, to do the exploration after a good structural study?
How do you count? I don't know how to answer that. I'm sorry. I don't know if Neil or Alex can help me out there. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just to come in, Julian, I mean, one of the problems and challenges, and I was on an earlier webinar this morning, there's a Northern Cape mining investment webinar underway, and it all goes back to mineral policy and, looking to really understand and develop our mid-tier and small mineral deposits. I mean, Barberton is just one of many, and we've had a number of discussions. Adrian Reynolds, I see, is on the talk, and it's an unrealized aspect of our South African geology, and until we have a more encouraging and enabling exploration investment environment, it's a challenge. This country just has the most amazing untapped potential. So at the end of this series, maybe that's something we've got to relook at as well.
Quick one here from Nils. Is there antimony associated with the gold?
I know of one ore body, Sheba West, has some antimony, but we're not looking at something like the Murchison where it's a completely a line where it's associated with it. So Barberton, no, not really.
Okay, I'm going to call it an end to the questions there. John, if you've got any messages, go to you, and then we'll come back to Eddie to finish off.
No, thanks, Neil. It was another excellent session. Thanks to all the people that attended, and particularly the people we haven't seen before. And well done, Caitlin. And we look forward to the next couple of talks. And I'm sure by then we'll have a couple of real hard questions for all of you.
Okay.
Thanks, Henny.
I'll just reiterate what John said. Thank you for the work and effort you've put into making this such a great talk, Caitlin. Well done. Next week, it's Alex Kisters, who obviously has been a co-author with Caitlin on those two papers she showed you, and he'll talk a little bit more about the bigger picture at Barberton. So we'll pass some of those questions on and he can pick them up next week. And don't forget that for CPD points and so forth, make sure Henny knows who you are and you're on this. And then there will be a YouTube recording of today's talk coming out fairly shortly. Henny, would you like to sort of add anything and then finish up?
No, I think you've said it all. Just one reminder is that the talks that are recorded all have the same link, and they're in the text if you should have missed last week's and you want to see that. Thanks again, Kate, and everybody for your contribution. I won't be here next Thursday, but please enjoy, and I'll be watching the video with interest after that. Thank you very much for attending, everybody. Goodbye then.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.